That whole corner is art made by residents, alumni, and good friends of the Cosanti Foundation and Arcosanti. And so some of it is made by folks who do currently live here, other pieces from people who lived here long ago. For instance, all of the ceramics over here on the left are an alum by the name of Richard Johnson, who actually helped us start the ceramics program that we have here at Arcosanti, which you'll see when we go outside, but is also the source of all the ceramic bells that are part of the regular gallery sales and exhibition. But we keep the resident art show going too, so that people can see the constant creativity that comes from the folks who are part of our bigger family. Everybody who lives at Arcosanti, with very few exceptions, has a full-time job with either the Cosanti Foundation, the nonprofit that owns and operates Arcosanti and Cosanti, or with Cosanti Originals, which is the bell-making business that's embedded in the overall piece of things. This wall is typically for what we call our cause bells. So alongside the regular bronze and ceramic bells that we sell, we also sell a series that have always been for various causes. For a long time, each cause bell, because there are, maybe 20 different styles of the cause bells, each one was unique to a different cause. So Save the Whales and Nature Conservancy, all kinds of different things. And then in the last few years, we brought them all together under a single cause umbrella with the advent of COVID. And so rather than one bell being for one cause and another bell being for another cause, if you bought any cause bell, portions of that would go into an overall fund, and each year Cosanti Originals chooses a different nonprofit to donate that money to. So we were able to give, it was something like $20,000 a couple of years ago to the Arizona, I think it was the Alliance of Nonprofits, but I'll have to double check on that, for their COVID relief fund. So we raised money to put into a fund that could then go out to other nonprofits doing COVID relief work around Arizona. This year, I think that it is I think it's an Earth Day or something like that kind of a fund. They pick it and the bells sell, and they sell out. So we have, it's a good problem to have, but we are actually at the point now where between the bell production here and the bell production at Cosanti, it's actually very, very difficult to keep up with demand. And that's also partly because of the advent of online sales, which is sort of a new thing for us to be exploring. But a good problem to have.
So the bells are made the same way, whether it's Arcosanti or Cosanti, it's just the shape that's different.
Yes and no. And I'm still learning more about this 9 years on, because it's not a part of the company that I spend a whole lot of time with. The shapes of the bells are the one consistent piece. I think that nearly every shape is made at both foundries, but I'm not 100% sure of that. And there are some shapes that are unique to one foundry or the other, as well as some of the extra pieces, the chain links and add-ons to some of the bells. Some of them are only made here, some of them are only made at Cosanti. So there are bells that have to have parts made in both places, and then all the parts have to be brought together in one place or the other so that it can actually be assembled. But the shapes of the bells are the consistent piece of things and always have been, and then the individual carvings on the bells are the part where the artists come in. So the folks who make the bells do all the hard work, the heavy lifting, the shoveling the silt and pouring the bronze. They are also the artisans who hand carve those designs into each and every one of the bells. So every single bell is just a little bit different. It comes from a few different places. The bell making was established originally as a main economic driver for the project. And so a significant portion of the funding for the Cosanti Foundation does come through the sales of the bells. But it's an indirect relationship, because the way it works is that those bell shapes that I was explaining are the consistent piece. That is the intellectual property of the Cosanti Foundation. And so Cosanti Originals, the bell making business, pays a design fee back to the Cosanti Foundation for the use of those shapes. And then that fee is keyed in a little bit to the production and sales of the bells, but it's also a fairly consistent amount in terms of the design fee. And they also lease their spaces from us, since we're the landowners. So after the bell sales, the other sources of income for the foundation have always been the workshops, various publications over the years, various honoraria, exhibition fees, etc., for for going out and speaking, particularly when Paolo Soleri was still alive. His speaking fees were a significant source of revenue. Other executives since then as well. The opportunity for folks from the Cosanti Foundation to go teach in various places. So revenue comes in through the fulfillment of our educational mission, both on-site here through the workshops and off-site when we go to other parts of the world, other universities, and share our experience and our knowledge base with them. And in addition, we've also always had the tours program. So we're here in the gallery, which is where the tours start. And we offer multiple daily tours, multiple specialty tours, and the income from those also feeds back into the project. Part of my job in coming back to Arcosanti is to establish a philanthropy program. So we have not had a dedicated fundraising program of a philanthropic nature. It's always been very incidental over the last 50 years. A grant here, a grant there, a big donation here. But in terms of really driving donations as a main source of income, we're just getting started. 55 years on, we're just getting started with that. So one of the things we're hoping to establish this year actually is a true membership program like other museums have, where people buy an annual membership and they have all kinds of perks as a result. Also in the process of renovating significant pieces of this building. This has been the visitor center for a long time, but the maintenance on it was much deferred for a long time. So we started last year by redoing the roof.
Will it be open regular hours starting in March, the cafe, or is it just a special event?
No, it would be open daily for regular meal service. They're almost done in here. This is fantastic. So a lot of things that needed to be done. For instance, because the roof was leaky, all of the carpet just got replaced. A lot of the tiling got redone. We actually poured a whole new concrete block in front of the eastern door. We installed new lighting. So all manner of, any one of these is kind of a little touch, but collectively, and then getting fresh paint on everything too. Collectively, it's given a huge refresh to the public side. And then the piece that most people won't ever see directly is that we also replaced all the kitchen equipment, which was going on 50 years old. People who are visitors to Arcosanti need to be on a guided tour in order to see the site. We don't allow people to wander the site freely. There are a couple of exceptions to that. One thing that visitors can do beyond just the visitor center without being on a tour is that they can go down through the bottom of this building and out the door, and there's a visitor's trail they can pick up. And they can walk up the opposite mesa to a shaded area that gives them a panoramic view. And then the other way that folks are able to gain a little bit more access to the site is by renting one of our Airbnbs for an overnight stay. And once you've done that, you have broader access over the course of your stay. At the moment, we don't have very many overnight bookings available to the public, and that goes back to the School of Architecture being here. The School of Architecture, formerly the Lloyd Wright School of Architecture, which was located at Taliesin down in Scottsdale, has left the Lloyd Wright Foundation and has moved in with Arcosanti up here. And so we have a fully accredited Masters of Architecture program that is in residence on site here at Arcosanti as part of our community. Because of the concrete that most of the site is built out of, and also because much of the site is built sunken in to the mesa a little bit, we have once you get just a few feet underground, you have much steadier, much lower temperatures. And so our indoor spaces tend to stay much cooler. It is intentionally designed as a completely south-facing community. So every structure on site is, as much as possible, pointed to the southern horizon. And that's because, particularly in the desert, it affords a great deal of warmth and sunlight in the winter months. So you can see, this is our ceramics studio, where the ceramic bells that you saw upstairs are actively manufactured. At Arcosanti, you can see that the sunlight in the winter, with the sun low on the southern horizon, gets all the way back into the back of this apse and allows folks to work outside. We're also enjoying a rather warm winter at the moment. But even on cooler days, the folks who work here can work outside as long as the sun is out. And then in the summer months, when the sun shifts further toward the northern horizon, the apse gives them shade from the direct heat of the day. And then the only thing that's receiving that heat is the silt beds where the bells are poured and cured. And that's good because the faster that the slip dries, the faster we can make the bells.
How do you know how to do the design?
You just make it up.
So it's just free in your head.
Yeah.
You don't sketch out anything in advance?
Sometimes I do. Sometimes I'll like draw it on. So you hold it like this, but then like if you want to just sketch it, you can hold it like a pencil and.
What work would you put into something like this?
This one I've been doing pretty slow. I probably started it like an hour ago.
Because it's really soft, isn't it?
It is. So also I started this one when it was a little too wet, so it doesn't look exactly how I want it to. But there's like a certain wetness at which it's like the right time to carve it.
And then what's the process after you finish carving?
We let them dry a little bit, and then we'll fire them, and then like assemble them. So put on clappers and like chains and stuff.
What is your name?
Maitri.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Where the bells are created through upside down impressions in silt beds over here, the building was made by right side up impressions on top of a silt pile. So to build a structure like this, what was done is that a mound of dirt was created and then some formwork laid in loosely to make sure that once you poured the concrete it wasn't slipping all over and to give it all some symmetrical form. And then you could paint directly on to the silt and then pour the concrete in place and let it cure enough that you could then excavate all the dirt out from underneath it, and what was left was the shell. But it's virtually identical to what happens in making the bells, where they're pressed into place. Some of them are plaster molds, but the silk cast ones are pressed into place, filled with the slip, and then over the course of a few hours or the day, depending on how large the bell is, using the incredibly advanced tool known as the turkey baster, you pull the excess slip out until you're left with just enough to have a bell, and let that cure until it's about leather hard, like Maitri was describing, so that you can actually begin to carve it. Paolo Soleri was a student of Frank Lloyd Wright's, and this form of concrete that you see here at the ceramics apse of concrete poured with large river rocks embedded in it as aggregate. Partly it makes the whole process easier because you're just using big rocks. You don't have to bring tons of gravel into the mixture. But also it tends to look really striking. And so you'll see this if you visit, for instance, Taliesin down in Scottsdale, as a design methodology that Soleri absorbed from Frank Lloyd Wright as a student of his and brought to Arcosanti. In addition to everything we've already talked about, it is also an example of the way structures at Arcosanti are designed to be extraordinarily multipurpose, and so not only to function under most climate conditions without the need for massive amounts of electrified heating and cooling, but also the ability to function as something other than what they are by day at other times, at night or on the weekends. This structure is also performance space. So there's a whole stage that can be laid in over top of the active workspace here, and it becomes a theater with seating along the outside, which is part of why this is designed the way that it is. With only 85 people on site and a fairly substantial site, this is pretty much the full staffing. And so this is one of the things people are frequently surprised about at Arcosanti, is that the density of the population, we're all spread out, a few people here, a few people there, and at the end of the day, it is 85 people across site that keep the whole thing running. There are a few different parallel projects that we've always enjoyed good relationships with. We have a number of community members here who have either visited or seriously lived at some of those places. Even here in Arizona, there are, among our tourism base, there are a number of people who make a point of visiting all of the ones that are out here. So the Biosphere 2 project is one that has some of the same ideas at play in terms of figuring out how to live a full life in a very limited amount of space. And of course, in the case of that project, it would have been by virtue of, because beyond that it would be unlivable. In our case, it would be because beyond that is nature, and we don't want to draw so heavily from that world. We would like it to still be there in generations future. And then another big one in the Southwest is earthships, which is in New Mexico. And those are structures, it's not meant as a densified, urbanized kind of a space, but it is meant as the idea of people being able to build highly livable, compact dwellings, largely out of recycled materials. So one of the common building elements of an earthship is old tires, for instance, or old things like that. So pieces of the idea at play, even in some of the regional projects in the Southwest. And then globally, there are two other projects that we've also had a long relationship with. One of them is Findhorn in Scotland, and the other one that we have an even stronger relationship with, and is roughly the same age as we are, is in India, a project called Auroville. But they were set up adjacent to an existing community and incorporated that community, and so that's been one of the drivers of their expansion over the years. But it's a similar kind of sensibility about space and society and quality of life, and a number of our residents have cycled through that community in addition to being part of this community. And then on the level that we're actually striving for at this point is less about smaller projects and more about really driving conversations about architecture and urban planning through the main channels of those conversations. The entire rest of the site is a contiguous structure, a weaving, winding, contiguous structure. So this is what we call West Housing. Very creative with our names, because it's located on the west side of the vaults. So these are apartments in this area, and on the other side, the east housing apartments. But in between those are the vaults, and so these are the tallest structures on site in terms of vertical height off of the main mesa. And these structures are that hybrid that I was talking about of having been silt cast on the ground panel by panel. So you can see that each of these consists of 12 panels, 24 total between the two vaults. Each one of those panels was constructed on a soft mound of dirt at ground level and then lifted into place with a crane. So a combination of the two techniques that built the apses and Crafts 3 was used to create these. These were actually the first structures on site in order to provide shade and a workspace for everybody, so that out here on the mesa, as the rest of the site was being built, there was relief from the site. The pool followed not long after some of the early structures were built. And then behind the vaults is the lab building, which is the metal shop, the woodworking shop, et cetera, all of the smaller trades that would have been needed in order to build all of the other things are based out of that in our maintenance department. Yeah, a great deal of Arcosanti, both natively and in terms of things that have been planted since we arrived out here 50 years ago. A great deal of Arcosanti contains various kinds of edible things. A lot of the herbs that folks cook with on site we draw because we know the little spots where they're growing. Rosemary and sage and thyme and marjoram all grow abundantly if you know where to look. And then in terms of the native landscape, we have a ton of prickly pear. So we've done prickly pear harvests. Mesquite, the pods of mesquite can be harvested and milled, so we'll do mesquite harvests when we've got the bandwidth. The olives as well, not native to the site, but the mesquite and the prickly pear for sure. We have some spots where watercress and horehound and they're just all kinds of things that grow in the desert. It's one of the things that's remarkable to a lot of people who, like me, are first-timers to the desert. Now I've got 10 years of experience, but when I first came out here, I'd never been in a desert environment before, and I had no idea how abundant the desert could actually be. So that's one of the great joys of living out here, is learning just how much really is here. We also have peacocks. So here's the crane that built Arcosanti, by the way, that I mentioned before, now in retirement. And then right behind that is the pond that is the oxidation pond for the wastewater from the main site. And that's been in place for 50 years and still works really, really well for us off of just a simple aerobic, anaerobic interaction, provided that we don't let the duckweed grow all over it. But the one that you're looking at out there is there's a man-made earthen dam that was here when we acquired the property, and we're not quite sure how far back that goes. The indigenous occupation of this land was largely from 1200 to 1400, so it's possible that there were variations on this dam then. It's also possible that that whole area was simply a lake at the time. But it was in place when we arrived at the property. And what it does is during the summer monsoons, this valletta, so the Agua Fria is on the other side of this mesa, but down here we have a valletta that just drains from the Cortes Lakes area. It's not connected to a river. In fact, the start of the valletta is on our property. This valletta will fill very quickly with water during a monsoon and flood into that lake bed. And so the dam helps to keep the water in check, because at various points in the past, that field has been an arable field. It hasn't been used that way in a few years, but we're rebuilding our agriculture program. And so the hope is that in the next year or two, that will be a planted field again that can then be fed through the summer months by the controlled release of water that's built up in the dam.
And then what kind of crops would you be growing in that field?
The one that I know of that was most successful was, for a number of years, we grew blue corn in collaboration with Hopi elders who came out and taught folks how to work the land, how to raise the corn, what to do, not just with the corn, but with the husks and basket weaving and all of these incredible things. So likely it will be some sort of planting like that. That question of how much do we want to lean back in the direction of the native species that are already adjusted to this desert environment, although with climate change, even that is changing. We've had, for 50 years, there had only been one major snow event at Arcosanti, and then for several years, recent years, we had feet of snow. All of the more sensitive succulent varieties, for instance, were really hard hit by that. And then in the summer, when it flips to having more and more days where the temperature is above 100 degrees, all of the succulents love it, but everything else is like, whoop. There's no one answer to that. You know, it's sort of like a Venn diagram where everybody overlaps a little bit in various ways with various other people, but not one thing, because we're not formed, you know, there is no like guru mentality, there is no particular spiritual underpinning, there is no hard ideology that anybody has to subscribe to in order to be here. And that's part of what I think has allowed the project to really attract an incredible global variety of people as participants and residents over the years, and also to send folks back out into the world. The 8,000 people who have taken those workshop programs are considered alumni by the Cosanti Foundation. And so that is a global network of people who have gone on to all manner of stellar professional accomplishment, some of it in the world of architecture and urban planning and design, others in the arts, others went on to be professors of various things and have passed their knowledge and experience on to their students through that. Folks who have gone on to become journalists and just see the world through really wonderful, interesting lenses, and sometimes bring the lens of arcology to what it is that they're writing about. But all walks of life. And then folks who are, you know, attorneys or working administratively in various universities, or just all sorts of people who come here at all different points in their lives and then go back into the world with the experience gained here or stay here. And sometimes that's a challenge when you're all trying to live together as a single community. But to me, I think it's part of what makes it attractive for someone like me, that it is that much more like a community that you might come from, where like you go into your own neighborhood back in wherever you're coming from, and there's not any one thing that unites everybody there except perhaps your identity as, in my case, living in Oregon, as a Portlander, right? But what does that mean? I live here, and at Arcosanti, the word we use often at least casually among ourselves, as Arconaut. We're just all Arconauts. We've chosen to make this place our home, and that's the one thing that unites us all.
Well, it's interesting the way a lot of people, I think the majority of people pass through, but then there are some people that stay, sometimes for a long time.
Yep. But again, for all manner of different reasons. Some folks came early on when they wanted to be part of this incredible construction project that had nothing like it anywhere in the world, and you didn't have to come with any past experience on a construction site. You could come here and just learn literally from the ground up. And then as the years went by, other folks came, like Richard Johnson, the ceramic artist, because there were opportunities to lean into the more artisan pieces of things that were going on. And then more time went by, and there were people who came because they wanted to get involved in the food program, in the cafe, in the bakery, in various forms of the agriculture program that have taken shape over the years. And for my personal interests, the thing that drew me in was the fact that it was a nonprofit. So most of my adult life has been spent working for various nonprofits in various ways, and this was a place that combined the three kinds of nonprofits that I'm most drawn to in one single place. It is an educational nonprofit, it's an environmental nonprofit, and it's an arts nonprofit, and it's all under the auspices of caring about how cities are built. And so it just never, these are all four things that for my whole life have spoken strongly to me. Nowhere is there a place where you can work on all four of those things together. Arcosanti was unique in that regard, and that's what drew me in, was the opportunity to weave all of these interests together in one place. That might also be a piece of things that is, if not universal across everybody who's here, fairly common, that people come in with a fairly dynamic set of interests that it can be hard to find footing for in most other places. You have to kind of decide that you're going to give up this piece of your life in order to live fully into these pieces in one place or another. And Arcosanti affords that kind of abundance and choice and the resources to do it. As a community, we actually have access to things like a bronze foundry and a ceramic studio. Those are mitigated because they also have active production that they need to take care of. But we do community recreational pours, so you can learn to work with bronze on a small scale, even if you don't work in the foundry. We have a community clay club, so people who are interested in ceramics can work with all of that. The metal shop, evenings and weekends, is available for people to use to work on their own projects, and so on and so forth. So you can really expand your horizons as part of the Arcosanti community, or deepen those horizons if you're coming in with prior knowledge of how to do some of those things. On the far side of the Crescent, we've got a few more apartments and dormitories on the second floor level, and then a number of mixed-use spaces on the ground floor level. So the community has a gym and a library, but then most obviously what you have is an amphitheater. And so this is a really unique live-work environment in the Crescent, because all of the folks who live in the apartments here then have basically box seating for any event that happens in the main amphitheater. So this is our biggest performance space. The last bit before the stage can be turned into a moat, both intentionally and not unintentionally, but by the weather itself. That's part of why it's there. It's actually a rainwater catchment system. We have a significant gray water management system that's been augmented in recent years around site, but this is part of it, where when the rains come, they'll collect in the moat and we can pump them back out away from the stage and into the gray water system. The gray water system then goes on to do a number of things, including watering a bioswale that was recently planted, so more edible landscaping. Through on the workshop program, you do basically a seminar week where you do more of a curriculum intensive piece of the work, but then the remaining balance, whether it's a 5 or 6 week workshop, so 4 or 5 weeks, you plug in as a volunteer with big projects. So the current cohort of workshop volunteers who are here are working on a number of rainwater mitigation issues that were exacerbated because we had a very active monsoon season this year. After a couple of years of not seeing summer rain hardly at all, we had some intense monsoons this year. and the erosion around various parts of site got out of control, and we started having, we would like the floor of the vaults, which we walked through just fine today, would become a very shallow pool of mud, for instance, that was just terribly dangerous. And all of that was just because the rainwater was washing in off of the parking lot. So they've done some really wonderful work to create drainage systems for all of that push it instead into the landscape where it can water the plants. They've done some plantings actually to help capture some of that, and they're working their way around site so that if we have another monsoon season like the one we had last year, we won't have nearly as many issues.
So the people that live here, do they pay to rent these places?
We do. It's called a co-use fee, and so the way Arcosanti is structured, Cosanti Foundation is the property owner. We're employees of either the Cosanti Foundation or Cosanti Originals, the bell-making business. That bell-making business, while Cosanti Foundation is a nonprofit, Cosanti Originals is a for-profit, and so we own that business, but it is a separate entity, a separate business structure. It has its own staff, it has its own financials, et cetera, et cetera. So everybody who's here, with a few exceptions, the school being the big one, more than likely works for one or the other of those entities as a paid employee. And then while we're not able to pay the best salaries in the world, what we are able to offer is the asset of working at Arcosanti and living at Arcosanti. And so in living at Arcosanti, we all pay an additional co-use of about $300 a month, depending on the status of your employment. And that's all in. For that, you have a space to live, you have access to all of the amenities, all of the environment, the pool, the internet, all of the utilities, everything is included in that $300 a month fee, which, to my mind, more than offsets the difference in pay versus what you might make if you were to do a similar job in, say, Phoenix or Tucson.
So then each person is responsible for their own food.
Yes.
Like they do their own shopping. It's not like community shopping or.
At different times, different parts of site have handled this in different ways. And so at the end of the day, as residents, if you're fully employed, you're responsible for your own food. If you're a volunteer, we find ways to take care of that for you. But as a standard employee of the organization, you'd be responsible for your own food. Folks who live in, like 5-bedroom apartments often will work together to bring those costs down by shopping together. And many people on site will go shopping together and, go to Costco and divvy up the costs that way. But we also do have food that's grown on site that we avail ourselves of. So we have a community farmers market. That's one of the ways that folks gather food. We have some skilled foragers among the folks here who will also just go out and find things and bring them back. And then we've got a few different parts of site where one of the places on site that we don't take the public into is called camp. So down the hill back where the food forest is being planted, down in that area is the original living area of Arcosanti. So as all of this was being built but was not in any way occupiable, the earliest residences, quote unquote, at Arcosanti were 8-foot by 8-foot cubes, test projects for pouring concrete and putting it together and working together. So there's a whole series of these down in what we call camp, because it really was the camp in the early days of Arcosanti. And it's a pretty beloved part of site. I lived down there. Many people who live up here now once lived down there, and we all have fond memories of it. But because you have an 8-foot by 8-foot cube as your home, it's a shared bathroom and a shared kitchen, and at any given time, anywhere from 5 to 20 people might live down there. It tends to thin out in the winter because it's hard to keep those spaces warm enough to be comfortable. But fully loaded, camp is home to 20 people at a time, and for sure there is a lot of collaborative, collective work done to shop together and cook together and provide meals. And often there will be potlucks that bring the whole community together in one place or another. And then there's the cafe. And so the cafe's been closed to the public as we've reworked the business plan and also renovated the spaces that are part of it. But the cafe is also, in many ways, the community hearth. Ideally, all the more so by being open to the public, because it's one of those places of incredible cultural exchange where the 88 people from around the world who live here then get to interact with the 50,000 visitors who come through Arcosanti every year. And so when the cafe is fully operational, typically, particularly at lunchtime, that's where most of the community will go to eat, because it's an opportunity to just hang out all together and meet new people and have these fabulous conversations, usually in several different languages, with people from everywhere. One of the things that we're really lucky to have at Arcosanti, and part of the reason this mesa was chosen, this property was chosen by the Soleris at the time, is that in the initial explorations of whether or not the site could be used, there was exploration of whether there was available groundwater, and indeed there is. So we have several wells on site. We are one of the common misconceptions about Arcosanti is the idea that we're meant to be 100% off the grid or self-sufficient, and that's not actually the case. That's not the purpose of Arcology, to have a very limited footprint and rely as little as possible on particularly fossil fuel resources is very high on the list of priorities, but to be off the grid is not. One of the ways we are, though, is with our water. And so all of the water at Arcosanti comes from a deep aquifer right beneath our feet. And at different parts of the property, it's at different depths, but it's about 80 feet below surface level. And so discovering that there was a very strong aquifer that, we have barely put any kind of a dent into it, even at full capacity with the agriculture program, or even at a much larger capacity if we were to really build out the site in future years. The groundwater here is a reliable source, partly because it's part of the Agua Fria watershed, and so the summer and winter rains continue to replenish that water, both right here and with what flows down from further upstream. So we are lucky to be in no danger of running out of water. Honestly, the challenge that we have is pumping it fast enough when it's at peak use, but not at all any concerns with the level of the water. Actually set up as a demonstration of what's going on when they're manufacturing the bells. So every bell is made in a sand mold, a nickel-rich sand, so that it A, can take the heat, and B, take the shape of what gets carved into it. But the molds themselves, and like in the ceramic studio, the bronze foundry workers, they know every part of this process, and they master every part of this process. So the artisan work is only a piece of it. The actual craft of manufacturing the bell is something everybody who works here eventually learns to do. And so step one is to just pack these boxes with sand, and inside every box, it's been a while since I did this part of the tour, so let me make sure I can do it without breaking things. They're two-part boxes, and you can kind of see where they put these things down when they're not using them.
There you go. Thank you.
Right? Like, just moving that, you get a sense of the physical labor involved in this, because they do dozens of these. And so inside every one of these is a bell mold that you can, it kind of always says, I want to make cakes in these, right? Little bundt cakes or something. So the aluminum bell molds are the shapes only of the basic bell, and then the sand is laid in around it, compacted with pneumatic compactors, and then once the sand is set, you can take carefully the whole thing apart and then get back into it and carve the shapes into the bells by hand. You're working inside and backwards, and so it's a whole, like, the mental gymnastics, getting used to what you're carving versus what's going to come out, is an interesting skill in and of itself. The foundry workers, it's hard to see from down here, but when we go up there, you'll be able to see it a little bit better. Maintain their own toolboxes, so kind of like you saw the unique tools that the ceramics artists develop for themselves. Each foundry worker also has their unique set of tools that they've developed for their unique patterns. The folks who were, yep, you've got it. It's got its little feet that have to slip back over those triangle pieces. Each foundry artisan's designs are unique, and certainly within the foundry, different foundry members can easily distinguish a bell that was made by this person versus that person just by looking at the carved design later on. And so folks who are avid collectors of the bells sometimes get to know the different artisans and follow those bells and only those bells made by the artisans whose particular style appeals to them. For my part, I just think they're all amazing, and so I've never particularly worried about whose bell I'm buying, but it's really interesting to me that for all of the identity of a Cosanti bell, the individual artisans are really easy to pick out once you develop an eye for it. So once all of the sand is complete and the carving is complete, everything goes onto the main deck, where a crucible filled with these bronze ingots will melt down over the course of the morning and then get pulled out and very carefully walked from sandbox to sandbox, and the bronze gets poured in. This is the plug, so this is what it looks like when it first gets poured. And so they let it dry, and usually after lunch they'll do a breakout of everything that they poured in the morning. And at that point, they're separating out the sand, which gets piled back up. That's what's under the tarp up there, sifted and piled back up for the next day's usage. And this piece then is what comes down here and has to get broken apart into the individual bells. The extra bronze can go back into the crucible and be reused, and then the bells get properly finished with the various equipment that you're seeing down here, and the drills are for getting the holes in them so that you can then add all of the links and the clappers and the pieces that turn it into a proper bell. Similar to the ceramics techniques, much heavier, much more heavy duty, much hotter. So these guys in the summer will start sometimes as early as 6 in the morning, as soon as there's daylight, basically, so that they can be done as close to noon as possible with their day, so that they're not dealing with the heat of the sun and the heat of molten bronze when the summer is at its worst. There's also pieces like these little links. So this is one of the pieces that's heavily cast at the Arcosanti foundry rather than at the Cosanti foundry. But same thing, so the bells, the other metal portions, they're all made out of basic molds and produced in the same way.